Okay, so today our speaker is Ed Richmond from Oklahoma State University, and he will be giving talk on the isomorphism problem for Schubert varieties.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I just wanted to say I'm very excited to be here actually in person. I've had some great conversations with Scott, and it's been great catching up with people that I've met. Today I'm going to be talking about some joint work with William Slofstra at the University of Waterloo, where we've been studying the isomorphism problem for Schubert varieties. So let me just kind of give the typical E-theory setup at the beginning. We're going to let G be a simple weak group over C, and in fact, there's nothing that I'm going to say that's going to require me to restrict to V group. If you like this kind of stuff, you can replace the V group with Kac-Moody group. And the isomorphism criterion that I'm going to talk about is going to work on this larger category of Schubert varieties. Inside here, we have a Weyl. Board is a little wobbly. A Weyl, and then using these two things, we look at this quotient. This has the structure of a projective variety. This is the flag variety. In the Kac-Moody case, it's not finite dimensional. That's an in variety. The flag variety decomposes, it has a left B action on here, and it decomposes into a finite set of B orbits called Schubert cells. And this indexing set is discrete in nature. It's called the Weyl group. A group of G. And for any element of these, so for any W and W, we define the Schubert variety. Schubert variety. XW, which is just defined to be the closure of one of these B orbits. The closure of one of these B orbits in the flag variety. And the main question I'm going to be dealing with today is, let's say we're given some Schubert variety and some flag variety and some other Schubert variety in a potentially different flag variety. So you sort of set this up independently twice, and then you just ask the question, when is there an algebraic isomorphism between these two things? When is there an algebraic? When are these algebraically isomorphic? Okay. And the answer that I want to give is a combinatorial condition. So basically, I want to be able to sort of extract the combinatorics from this picture, which will primarily involve the Weyl group, and give you a criteria to determine when these two things are isomorphic. So let me. There's only two boards. Maybe I won't dive into this classic example like too much, but G equaling S1C is kind of the canonical example of all of this. B being upper triangular matrices is your canonical choice for B, and your flag variety in this case is the collection of nested vector spaces such that each piece of your vector space is dimension I, and there's some sort of fixed global space like this. And W, in this case, are just permutations or permutation matrices, and this has a generating set SI, where as permutations, they're just generated by these simple transpositions that flip I and I plus 1. So this is the common draw. And then for every one of these permutations, you have a Schubert variety. I won't go into that definition because it's not going to be, or at least the type A definition here because it's not relevant. But this is kind of the canonical picture that a lot of people think about when they think about flag varieties and when they think about Weyl groups. Okay. All right. So in general, so what I want to talk about next is like I want to give this criteria. So I want to talk a little bit about the combinatorial data. And in particular, the combinatorial data of W. Combinatorial data of W. So in general, W, this Weyl group, Cox-Moody group, it's a Cox group. And when you have a Cox group, you have a specified generating set. You call these Cox-Moody systems with a finite generating set, S, simple generators, S1 through Sn. In this case over here, the generating set S are these simple transpositions. And so it's a group generated by these simple reflections. There's some other things that we need to know. There's a notion of length. There's a notion of length here where W can be written as SI1 through SIL. And here the length of W is L. So what is this? Basically, you take your element of your group and you write it with as few generators as possible. And this number of generators is unique. That's specified as the length of a permutation or a length of a Weyl group element. There's another thing we need, Bruhat order. So if I have, so this is a partial order that we put on W, where we say U is less than or equal to W if there exists reduced expressions, U equaling this product of S's, and maybe W equaling this product of S's, such that this sequence, J, is a subsequence of I. So the elements of this group can be partially ordered like this. You just need to find two reduced expressions, such that this expression is a subsequence of this expression, and you just impose this order on your Weyl group. And the last bit of data that I want to talk about, kind of in this list right here, is what I call the support of W, which I'm going to denote S of W. And the way I'm going to define this is it's going to be all simple generators such that S, here, let me, sorry, I didn't budget the space quite correctly. Such that S is less than or equal to W. In other words, what is this set? The set is basically the collection of simple generators needed to write out any reduced word of your corresponding element. So, so that's why I call it the support, because it's like the things you need to write out element W. Okay. So just from the Weyl group, we have all these statistics that you can impose, either partial orders or length, support. These are all things that we're going to need to say what I want to say. But maybe before I get sort of too much into it, I want to make some remarks about this data. So remarks. Suppose we do have an isomorphism between two Schubert varieties. Then a lot of this stuff that I've talked about the corresponding Weyl group element has to be the same. It has to be the same. So let me just list some of these. First thing that has to be the same is that their lengths have to be the same. And why is this? Is because the length geometrically corresponds to the dimension of the variety. And if they're different dimensions, then you're pretty much going to be all. So this is because dimensions have to be the same. Other things that need to be the same is the size of the support set has to be the same. So size of the support set. And why is that? It turns out that the size of the support set corresponds to H2, the second homology group, the dimension of the second homology group of these Schubert varieties. So if you know something a little bit about the topology, you know that basically in the Bura interval sitting below W or W prime, that these are going to index the generators for H2 of these two varieties like this. More generally than that, this is a topology. This doesn't really have to do with this data right here, but an extension of this is that if they're isomorphic as varieties, then they're topologically the same. So their cohomology rings as rings have to be isomorphic.
The prime one.
Yeah, prime on the second one. Thank you. This. And related to this, now this is I wrote number 4 here. This might be 3. And then 4. Another thing that has to be the same. This one may be a little bit harder to see, but as intervals, as Bura intervals. So you have a partial order on this. So you can consider all elements that sit below. This forms a sub-poset of the partial order on the whole Weyl group. And I claim that the interval structure here has to perfectly match the interval structure here. And these are the same as posets. They're the same as posets like this. But here's the thing. If I give you W and W prime that satisfies all of this together, that's not enough to say that they're isomorphic. In fact, there are tons of examples where I can produce tons of examples where all of this stuff matches, but these are not isomorphic. And in fact, it already breaks down with L equaling 2. L equaling 1, you're okay, but length 2, you're already kind of you're already out of luck. Okay, so the moral of this is that basically that the Weyl group by itself is not enough to distinguish Schubert varieties. It's just not enough. And you might already know this. For example, the Weyl group of type C and the Weyl group of type B are the same. Like as Coxeter groups, they're identical, but the Schubert varieties are not identical at all. In fact, like notions of smoothness, like there are a different number of smooth Schubert varieties in one compared to the other. So there's no way to sort of match these up. So we need something extra. There needs to be some extra data floating around here to distinguish these two things. So I'd like to talk about that next. What's the extra data? So I want to talk about Cartan matrices. Matrix. Okay, and I'm going to sort of do this from a view of a combinatorial. So I'm going to sort of define these as just like a matrix that satisfies some conditions, and then tell you using that data, how would I build a Lie algebra and then eventually a Lie group. And then once you have a Lie group, you can build Schubert varieties and do all that other good stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to let S just be a finite set. This S will eventually be this S, but right now it's just a finite set. And we're going to say that A to AST, S and T and S is a generalized Cartan matrix. If and then I'll abbreviate this like GCM for generalized Cartan matrix. If the following things happen, so one is going to be that the diagonal entries are all just 2's. Diagonal entries are all just 2's. The off diagonal entries. The off diagonal entries are non-positive integers, so just negative integers, but they can be 0. But if they are 0, then the entry sitting across the way has to also be 0. So the zeros come in transposed pairs, but the rest of the off-diagonal entries can be just negative numbers, like whatever they want to be. So an example of a Cartan matrix. So Cartan matrix kind of refers to the finite type ones. Generalized refers to Kac-Moody. There's some major restrictions on what negative numbers you're allowed to take if you want to stay finite. But when you pass to the Kac-Moody world, then like all bets are off, and you can kind of do almost anything. Is there a question? No. Okay, so an example, and again, I'm going to do like, if I started with this, so you have twos along the diagonal. Let's sort of let's label S. S has 3 elements. Let's label them S1, S2, S3. Like this, twos along the diagonal. Negative numbers are 0 across. And I claim that when you build a Lie group out of this data, then you end up getting SL4. You end up getting SL4. So I won't do that construction, but it's a fairly standard construction. Okay. But the general theory. Sorry, I keep losing the eraser. But the general theory basically says that this matrix contains all the information you need to first. So what you do is you start with A, and then you build some sort of algebra. Let's call it Lie algebra. So you specify some generators. You impose some relations on those such that there's a valid Lie bracket floating around, and everything kind of works out. And then from here, there's some sort of exponentiation process to get to some sort of Lie group. And then once you have a Lie group, you have notions of Borels, and you can get to like flag varieties, and then Schubert varieties, and you do things like this. So for me, it's kind of like you're starting. So this matrix is kind of like encodes sort of the bare bones to creating a Lie theory based on this matrix. Yeah, and you can start. The only rules is like you start with any matrix of this form, and you can just follow this process. It was laid down by Kac-Moody independently, but they've done some things together as well. And you can do this. Okay. So from here, you can build a Weyl group, but it turns out there's a very nice way to build a Weyl group directly from this matrix. So I'm going to tell you about how to do that next. So building the Weyl group from this. So what you do is this Weyl group will now depend on A. It's going to be generated by these by the finite set you're given. And what you're going to do to build this Weyl group is I'm going to pair up elements, and I'm going to impose an exponent such that when you multiply this pair however many times, you're going to get the identity, and those will be the relations on this group. And here's what the exponents are. Well, the first thing is that if you pick S twice, those are 1. That just says that every symbol reflection is its own identity or inverse. That's all it says. And for the others, this is what you do. I'm going to write it over here. Maybe I should never say that. For the others, this is what you do. MST can be the following things. It can be 2, it can be 3, it can be 4, it can be 6, it can be infinity, if product of transposed entries is one of the following. It can be 0, it can be 1, it can be 2, it can be 3, or it can be bigger than or equal to 4. So if it's 0, then the generators commute. If it's 1, it's like this classic braid relation you see for permutations. If it's 2, then you get this EC braid relation. This is the G2 braid relation. And then all others, it's free. There's no relation between generators. This is what we call sometimes crystallographic Coxeter groups. Coxeter groups that satisfy. So a Coxeter group by definition is finite generating set with relations that look just like this. And for general Cox groups, you can put any number here. Crystallographic means you have to restrict to these numbers. And they're exactly the Coxeter groups that appear as Weyl groups of some Lie group or Kac-Moody group. Okay. So directly from the matrix, you can construct a Weyl group without going through any of this other fancy stuff, just purely combinatorial. And now I'm going to ask the question. So now I claim that all the information I need to determine when two Schubert varieties are isomorphic it's in play. So I'm going to work on that. Next. Okay, so again, now the question is going to be when is XW? Okay, so in my Schubert variety, I'm going to impose a little bit of bonus information. So this is the Weyl group element, but here's the Cartan matrix, which you build it. And I want to know this question. Actually, before we get to the criteria, I want to talk about a little bit about what's known before, because it turns out that the answer in the end really borrows itself from existing information. So let's look at some low dimensional examples. Start down here. Low dimensional examples. Okay. So the first case will be length 1, which means that W is just one generator. And there's not much to do here. Every Schubert variety is a P1, just a sphere. There's nothing. So the answer here is that all length 1 Schubert varieties are isomorphic because they're all P1s. Okay, and I'm going to draw the poset structure on the corresponding interval, which is not very interesting for length 1. You have your element, and then you have your identity sitting below it, and that's the interval. Length 2 is the first truly interesting case. So here W is the product of two simple generators such that they can't be the same. So it's the product of two simple generators. And here's what we get. XWA is in fact isomorphic to a Hertzberg surface. So this is, so I'll tell you a little bit. So this is what we call a Hertzberg surface. Okay, so it's indexed by some integer. So some positive integer, they're indexed by positive integers. And these things are certain, Hertzberg surface is a certain P1 bundle over another P1. These things are smooth toric manifolds. And the Brouwer interval sitting below has a Hasse diagram that looks like this. They're all this sort of diamond shape, like this. And then the question is, so I made this claim. The question is, given this Schubert variety, where is this index n appearing? And I claim that it appears in the Cartan matrix. And it appears in the following way. So what we're going to do is we're going to restrict to the submatrix corresponding to the rows and columns indexed by S and T. So we'll focus on this just this little part. There are twos along the diagonal, and then there's an entry here, and there's an entry here, like this. We'll just focus on this submatrix corresponding to this, and I claim that n appears in the following way: that this number right here, AST, is negative n. Is negative n. And that's how you determine which Schubert variety you are. And it does not matter what this number is at all. This number can be -1, could be -100. And this is it. This is what's going to determine it. Now, if I flip these two, then it will be this number down here that determines which class it's in, or which isomorphism class it's in. So, okay. So, for example, if I look at C2, so C2 has a Cartan matrix like this. And if I label, okay, so here's something that's a little bit that threw me off for a little while. So the way I'm building this up is that this right here is the long root, and this right here is the short root, or the root corresponding to the reflection, which is kind of opposite. So this means that the Dynkin diagram looks like this, which is kind of what a lot of people would call this B2, but I'm calling it C2. But under this convention, what I'm going to say basically is that so this is like so in this case, ST is going to be Hertzberg surface indexed by 1. And then if I reverse these two, then this is Hertzberg surface indexed by F2. So ST is seeing an F1 and TS is seeing an F2. This, and in particular, these two Schubert varieties of type C2 are not isomorphic. Yes?
Does it then tell you something geometrical about these?
Yeah, so as a P1 bundle, it's sort of like there's a second factor that's being twisted by a factor of n. I don't have the exact formula right now, but this n is sort of measuring this twist that's happening in the bundle. So that's what's happening there. There's a way to kind of write these down purely in terms of polynomial equations. They're simple enough to do that. And you can see the twist. Yeah, there's like two copies of P1s, and then you have a torus active. And the torus acts normally on the first factor, but then it acts by like some power of t to the power n on the second factor, and then you quotient out by the torus action. And this is sort of the construction. Thanks. So the theorem here, which especially think that people who study toric manifolds, they probably knew this, but the theorem is going to be that actually I'm going to use S1, S2A is algebraically isomorphic to T1, T2, A prime. If only if Cartan entry indexed by S1 and S2 is the same as the Cartan entry indexed by T1, T2 in this other matrix. Like this. Okay. All right. Okay, so we did length 1, length 2, length 3, like already gets pretty complicated, but I want to kind of briefly mention some other characterizations. So we're not the first to think about isomorphism problems between Schubert varieties. So I want to talk about some other characterizations that people have done. So I want to talk about cohomological characterizations. Cohomological characterizations. So one, toric manifolds. Have been classified using cohomology. This is by Masuda in 2008, where they basically say that two toric manifolds are isomorphic if and only if equivariant cohomology T equivariant cohomology is because we get T prime here, are isomorphic as ring. And how is that related to us? There's kind of a sub-result, 1A, and that says that the XWA is a toric manifold. If and only if W has a reduced, let's see. Distinct. So this is a result of Karo Panchami. I'm just gonna, he has a long name, 2013, where he was able to show that if your W is a product of distinct reflections, so like S1, S2, S3, S4, S5, you know, or there's something, there's no reflection repeats, then it turns out that XWA is a toric manifold, which means that this subclass of Schubert varieties has a cohomological characterization by toric equivariant cohomology. As this. But this T is very this T is very important. In fact, if you remove the T, then this gets ruined. In fact, it already gets ruined here because if you don't care about algebraic isomorphism, let's go up to diffeomorphic. Then Hertzberg surfaces are diffeomorphic up to whether or not n is even or odd, up to parity. So F1 is diffeomorphic to F3, which F3 actually appears in D2. If they're diffeomorphic, their cohomology rings are isomorphic. But F1 and F3 are not algebraically isomorphic. So this is very delicate, very delicate. There's another class of Schubert varieties that people have studied. Let me mention this class, and then after that, I'll kind of state the general classification. So the second group, I actually don't know much about these. There are these things called partition varieties, partition Schubert varieties. And these are certain Schubert varieties indexed by partitions. They live in some kind of partial flag variety. So this is not the full G mod B. And there's this work by Delvin, Martin, and Reiner from 2007, where they were able to say that for this certain subclass, it's enough to look at their cohomology rings to determine whether they're isomorphic. So this is Reiner. 07. They were able to do some partial work on this problem at all. Sorry, I'm abbreviating names for the sake of time. But yeah, Devlin, Martin, and Reiner have done this. Okay, but we searched the literature very heavily, and like this was kind of all we could really find in terms of this classification problem. So let me tell you a little bit about the definition. Okay, and it's kind of based off of the length to case. Okay, it's something we call a Cartan equivalence. Cartan equivalence. Okay. So we're we'll have A and A prime, and we'll have W and WA and W prime and WA prime. I'm just setting up the two scenarios, and we're going to say WA, W prime, A prime are Cartan equivalent if there exists a bijection sigma from the support of W to the support of W prime. So there's this bijection between their support sets such that the following happens. One, there exists reduced words W equal to S1 through, I'm just going to SK, and W prime equal to T1 through TK, such that sigma of SI is TI. So you find two reduced words that's compatible with this bijection between supports. That's I'll write an example in a second. And then the second condition is going to be for every pair SI times SJ that's less than W, the entries in the Cartan matrix have to match. The entries in the Cartan matrix have to match. And that's it. Prime. And the other matrix on the other side. The other matrix on the other side. That's it. Okay. So for an example, I'm in type A, for example, and I take W to be like S1, S2, S1, and like say S4. So these are next to each other, and this is far away. And I take W prime to be like, I don't know, S5 for S5 and S1. Then I claim these are Cartan equivalent. What's the bijection? Sigma is going to send. So the support is S1, S2, S4. And what will I send this to? I can send this to 5, 4, 1 in those relative orders. And this is a Cartan equivalence. This is a Cartan equivalence because the matrix. So first, it's sending this reduced word exactly to this reduced word. And then if I look at all pairs, if I look at like S1, S2, it's going to give me -1. But so is S5, S4. That also gives me -1. So the match. You look at all pairwise matchings of distinct generators, and they'll match. They'll match. Like this. Just to drive it home, you can kind of see this. This is sort of the subgraph of the Dynkin diagram of the support here. And if I look at the subgraph of the Dynkin diagram over here, then what you get is you get like this piece and going to this piece, and this piece going to this piece. Okay, and here's the theorem. So here's the theorem I need. The following. Following are equivalent. One. So same thing, W and W prime. So first thing is WA. WA prime. Cartan equivalent. Cartan equivalent. CE. Okay. 2. I'm going to drop the A in the A primes. The Schubert varieties are algebraically isomorphic. 3 is actually required in our proof, so we get it for free, is that there exists a ring isomorphism from the cohomology of XW, the cohomology XW prime, such that it's not enough to be isomorphic, such that the Schubert basis maps the Schubert basis. So there's this notion of Schubert classes in this cohomology ring. And there's also a notion here. And this not only has to be a ring isomorphism, it has to be one that sends this finite set to this finite set. And all 3 of these are equivalent. In the Hertzberg surface, you can easily find, like when I compare F1 to F3, you can actually show, because their cohomology rings are easy enough. You know, you can actually show that they're ring isomorphic, but the isomorphism sends the Schubert basis to some weird linear combination of Schubert things over here. It's a perfectly good isomorphism, but it's not preserving Schubert basis. Okay. So this is the characterization, and it's pretty cool. How long do I have till 5, or do I have to end 5 minutes early? Just trying to debate how much.
Oh, yeah, you have plenty of time.
Okay. Cool.
I probably want to have about 5 to 2 questions.
Yep. Okay. So I'll just give you some examples of like how we can compare things. So for example, I'll just write out some matrices. We've done this a few times. This is A3. And for example, I can compare it to B3. Compared to B3. So this is what I'm calling B3 because this is long, short. Like so this looks like C3 convention, but if you follow Kumar's book, he never writes this out, but you can figure it out. This ends up being B3, even though it looks like C3. You look like this. And now what I want to do is I just want to compare Schubert variety. I just want to do some comparisons, apply the Cartan equivalence. Just a few comparisons just kind of show you how easy it is to me. So one is, for example, I'll use A for I'll use A3 like this to indicate that I'm using that matrix. So I can immediately see that this 3-dimensional Schubert variety is isomorphic to this 3-dimensional Schubert variety right away. But if I write them backwards, and the isomorphism breaks. These have unique reduced words, so there's like kind of nothing to, there's no like weird stuff going on. Check. But you just know right away, and it's because like the 3-2 entry in these matrices do not match. So you're done. Can't be isomorphic like this. Another interesting thing that we can see is that we focus on the type A. So here I have the 3 and the 1, they commute, and the 2 stuck on the outside. And if I write down the inverse of this element, then the 3 and the 1 are now stuck in front. You can immediately check that these cannot be isomorphic. So this is an example of a Schubert variety non-isomorphic to the Schubert variety indexed by the inverse element. This is actually the simplest case of this happening. So this is interesting because the local properties of XW always transfer to the local properties of XW inverse. But this is saying that there's something globally getting ruined in terms of algebraic isomorphism between these two. And why is this not algebraic? So S2 is stuck in front. It can't commute past 1 or 3. 2 is stuck in front. Here, the 1 and 3 are stuck in front. So when you attempt to write down a Cartan equivalence from here, 2 has to get mapped to either 1 or 3. Those are your only options. And there's no way to match the, when you look at the type A matrix, you can't match. You can't match these first 2. So 2 basically has to go to a 2, and it can't in this case. Can't in this case. Okay. There's a lot of other fallout. It turns out that when you have this equivalent, there's a lot of fallout in terms of graph theory. So let's talk about graphs for a little bit. So we're going to define. We're going to let. So given a Cartan matrix, we'll define a graph with vertex set S and edge set E, such that E S comma T will be an edge if and only if S comma T is not 0. The way you can think about this graph is basically like if 2 elements commute, then you don't write an edge. But if they don't commute, then you draw an edge. But we're going to ignore sort of the double edges and the arrows and everything. This is this. I always call this the simple Coxeter graph underlying the Dynkin graph, like this. And one corollary of this result is that 2 Schubert varieties are algebraically isomorphic. Okay, and then what you can do is you can consider the subgraph corresponding to the support of an element. So here you have vertices, all the simple reflections. You look at the support, that's a subgraph. That these subgraphs have to be graph isomorphic. And this seems kind of innocent at first, but this actually gets very powerful because, for example, if you look at type A, whose Coxeter graph is just a path, if you have a fully supported element, which means that you use every reflection in that in the support, which is most Schubert varieties use every element. Then what this says is that you can only have at most one other Schubert variety in the same flag variety that you can be isomorphic to, and that's because the only isomorphism you have on a whole path is either, well, you have 2. You have the identity, which just says it says you're isomorphic to yourself, and then you have the one that flips, the Dynkin automorphism. That's it. Those are your only possible 2 ones. So if they're isomorphic, you can only have really 2 for the fully supported ones. If they're not fully supported, then you have this weird shifting of and sort of Feynman subgraphs like this. But even if you're not fully supported, let me do another example. So let's say I have like S1, S2, S1, S4. And I want to find, and let's say I'm dealing in, let's say I'm in A4. And I want to ask myself, so this is not fully supported. I want to ask myself, what are all the Schubert varieties in A4 that are isomorphic to this particular Schubert variety in A4? Well, it turns out it's going to be all Schubert varieties that have a reduced expression like this, whose underlying graph has this kind of flavor. It turns out there's only 3 others. there are only 3 others. So the other ones are going to be, yeah. Oops, sorry. I started the example wrong. This is a full braid right here. I didn't want to have the full braid there. I wanted to just have the S1, S2 there just to make it a little more interesting. So what can you do? You can switch the one in the place of the 1 and 2. It's a different Schubert variety that's isomorphic to the original. And then the only other option you have is to have a support like this. This is the only graph. This is the only subgraph of the path that's isomorphic to the original. So you end up getting S3, S4, S1, and then S4, 3, S1. So you get this one, and then you get these 3 others, and you have them all. The theorem says that you can't have any others within A4. Now, if I ask within A5, then you're going to get a lot more. But you get something like this. Oh, okay. So I was going to talk about the proof, but maybe I won't. Let me tell you sort of in words one more corollary. Here's another question that we asked that kind of no one was asking, but we decided to ask it anyway. We said if you look at so this works for Kac-Moody. So we asked ourselves, let's consider Schubert varieties of affine type A. So the graph, the Dynkin graph of affine type A is a cycle. The corresponding flag variety is infinite dimensional, but the Schubert varieties are finite dimensional. We asked ourselves, which Schubert varieties of affine type A are isomorphic to a Schubert variety of finite type? Because you have tons of these big Schubert varieties you don't know. Well, if your Schubert variety is fully supported, then its graph is a cycle. And no Schubert variety of finite type has a graph that's a cycle because they're all trees. All the finite type graphs are trees. So the only ones are the ones that the only ones of affine type A that can be isomorphic to a Schubert variety is when you don't have one of these nodes, but then you're actually a Schubert variety of honest type A because then you become a path. So there are no non-trivial Schubert varieties of affine type A that are of actual finite type. So that's kind of like another, there are all these like little corollaries that you could store, write them down forever. Which I don't know, a lot of fun doing. Okay. So I didn't talk about the proof, but I'm going to stop here because we're getting close to 5. So thanks for listening.
Questions?
What's this corollary you wrote down? The converse is obviously false because the negative entries could be different sizes.
Yeah. Like for example, if I tacked on a S2 here, which is perfectly fine, but its support set doesn't change at all. So the converse is definitely false. There's a way you could sort of carefully write a converse, but I chose. It's not hard, but it's sort of like it's just cumbersome to write down. So this is sort of the simple one direction you can say in 3 minutes. You could write down a characterization on like what these support sets need to satisfy. There has to also be a length condition on these things. There's a lot of things you have to throw in, but there is kind of the converse you could write, but it's not it almost feels like it's writing the theorem again. Yeah.
So is there any study for the partial flag variety?
Yeah, we tried, and we I already erased the main theorem. We found examples in the partial flag variety where 2 Schubert varieties were not isomorphic. In fact, we could tell one was in the partial flag variety where one was singular and one was smooth, but their cohomology rings were actually isomorphic, and it preserved Schubert basis. So that third part was kind of like already going to be false. And the Cartan equivalence, it gets, there's definitely some dependence on the parabolic that you're trying to model out by. And it was going to get messy. So so we have in our paper, we have an example of like how it fails for partial flag varieties. So that's still like a open question to us. Like, could you come up with a analogous characterization? Although I should say I've been talking to Andrew's book when I showed him this, and we think for the Grassmannian of type A, and actually for co-minuscule flag varieties, Schubert varieties from co-minuscule flag varieties, that they will be determined by their cohomology rings. If you restrict to those, like restrict to co-minuscule, like one particular type, and you want to just compare Schubert varieties within that one type, that there should be a in type A. In fact, it's kind of like you have a partition, and it's a transpose partition. It's like the only other one that you can get, and that's it. But that's still kind of, I may have said that too early, because we just sort of talked to each other and nodded our heads like, yeah, this is like going to work, but then we haven't written anything down. So there could be something dramatically wrong. And, write it down. But for general parabolic, I don't know.
So for the affine Grassmannian, like.
Yeah, so affine Grassmannian would be again in like the parabolic situation.
So like the inverse image of the Borel.
So there's the affine full flag variety, which is what I'm talking about here. But the affine Grassmannian would be the parabolic corresponding to deleting one of these notes. And for the affine Grassmannian, this is, yeah, we haven't studied that case specifically. But for the affine full flag variety, then this falls into that category. As for all the other affine full flag varieties.
Any other question? Okay, and let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
Okay, so people are interested in going for dinner tonight, please stick around.